hi, hello. Thank you very much, Mandana, for this invitation and presentation. I feel especially honored to be here, especially because I think I'm much less specialized than you on that topic, and I look forward for your discussion. I hope my contribution as a linguist and anthropologist, as Mandana said, will be of interest to you, and especially on the work I did and reflection on digital return. And I'm sorry, I know Mandana was horrified when I told her I will use that old thing, but I'm still a transmedia person, so I prefer to read on paper than on the wall sometimes, especially with these classes. So I'd like today to open or reopen some issues on digital archives and platforms based on a particular experience of creating a documentation digital return platform with members of an Amazonian group, or two very related Amazonian groups, the Wayana and Apalai from French Guiana and Brazil, a platform mainly dedicated to giving access to recordings, artifacts, and other documents collected on the language and culture, and encourage creation of new material and integration of these materials with meta-commons on that platform. So with this case, I'd like to highlight the significance of linguistic and anthropological documentation project, and more precisely the major archive platforms we've heard about this morning and we will hear more about these days, while at the same time stressing the difficult links of these big platforms with the communities or local communities or source communities, as we call it. So the fact is that digitalized and born digital collections about endangered languages are often hidden behind or inside digital platforms that are cryptic to non-initiated communities, and hence to most of those directly concerned by the collection, beside the researchers, let's say, which we can refer as the source communities. So they're not fair for everyone. And as Mandana put it recently, and I quote, collections are presented in a few majority language and written systems, excluding people who do not read and write in English, for example. These, their access points, the information that the collections contain, are expressed through enigmatic metadata ontologies rooted in cosmology of academic disciplines, only accessible for, to insiders of these disciplines. End of quote. So consequently, my aim is to open to discussion the dilemma between large platforms with considerable technical and economic strengths, supposedly serving minority groups, but at the same time, very hard to access for them, on the one hand, and on the other hand, small platforms which can be more responsive to the archiving conceptions and needs of source communities, and hence much more accessible to them, although they are much more fragile technically, economically, and institutionally. In addition to issues commonly discussed, such as conditions of restriction of access and copyright, some crucial points are language, of course, the language of the interface, the structure, classification, and connection between items, or the ergonomics and graphism of the front desk. And at the end of the day, the question is how far can we decolonize archive platforms and allow linguistically and culturally differentiated digital access, visualization, and organization of collections. And we all know this is not a new question, but it's still an unsolved one. So today, I wish to present a collaborative project that we developed with a group of Wayana and Apalai people from French Guiana to create a digital platform that attempts to meet as closely as possible their demand for access to linguistic, ethnographic, and ethno-musicological collections about them in a linguistically and culturally appropriate way. A platform that would also allow for the requalification, correction, and enrichment of all collection, and the addition of new digital material, as I said. And based on this experience, I'd like to highlight and open to discussion some of the challenges that such an enterprise implied, and some of the issues and the unsolved questions it raised. So, so that was just what I just said. And the outline is that I'll start off by presenting how the project named SAWA emerged and what its aim were. SAWA is the acronym of the French long title Savoir autochtone Wayana Apalai, une nouvelle approche de la restitution et ses implications sur les formes de transmission, which can be roughly translated into English as Wayana and Apalai, Indigenous Forms of Knowledge, a novel approach to restitution or return and its impact on cultural transmission in French Guiana. Then in part 2, I'll say a few words about the difficulties of access for non-initiated users that are inbuilt in the otherwise wonderful documentation platforms you know well about. And these difficulties limit to a rather large extent the access to most of the members of the target indigenous communities. In part 3, I expand on the work done in the SAWA project and the digital platform known as Watao. That resulted from it. And lastly, in part 4, as a conclusion, I'll highlight some of the challenges of this type of project implies, and which should maybe nourish further work. So let's start with the emergence and first motivations of the collaborative project SAWA of Digital Return. The Wayana and Apalai are a group of approximately 2,500 speaking people. They speak a Carib language, and they live in a remote part of Guyana, the Guyanese forest of Brazil, Suriname, and French Guiana. So the Wayana and the Apalai live in close relation, but the Apalai are more in Brazil and seldom mix with Wayana in the French communities. And we worked more with the Wayana community. I can expand on that later. Members of the Wayana community, such as Mataliwa Kuliyaman, Aimawale Opoya, you see these names after, Sixili, it's among them, who had been working for long with anthropologists and linguists, claimed to access collections about their culture that had been archived in different personal and institutional collections, mostly across Europe. Here you see one part of these collections that we worked with, but there are more. That the SAWA project was set off by the curiosity of a group of Wayana intellectuals concerned about the whereabouts of the enormous photographs, artifacts, audio recordings, and other items of the material and intangible culture that various generations of foreigners have been collecting in the village over the past centuries. They were puzzled by these visitors' unrelenting frenzy to collect and wanted to know what motivation lay behind it. They wondered what had become of all these items and were eager to discover remnants of their past culture. As Mataliwa Kuliyaman, one of the leader instigator of the project, once put it, and I won't read everything, but maybe just a part. So the SAWA project opened the way to the work of anthropologists. We had been waiting for several years for the work to come back. We wanted to access it, we wondered where to find it and how to retrieve it. First of all, we were interested in the stories and myths that had been recorded from our great-grandparents, and this is what led us down to the past. And I wondered, how can we awaken these sleeping traces of the past? All we did was go around in circles in village, and we didn't have the canoe to go and look for it. So the SAWA project was an opportunity to ask, the plane was there, here we are, take us with you to the collections. Many of the indigenous protagonists of the project had worked in close connection to non-native researchers, and many as members of collaborative projects, and they also had experienced co-authorship in this context. However, they felt somewhat dispossessed of the resulting documentation and findings and longed for restitution. Physical repatriation, and that is important, of the actual recordings and artifacts was not an issue for them. For example, during conference discussion held in museums, in particular in the Musée du Quai Branly, the main museum of anthropology in France, which is partner of the project, the public regularly asked the Wayana speakers if they wanted the collections shipped back to their villages, expecting a positive and strident reply. Yet, our Wayana colleagues systematically answered that the record items and the objects were safer and better preserved in institutional settings, and that virtual reconnection with them was their primary objective. Apart from the need, so this is one of the book, Mataliwa, co-authorship with Eliane Camargo, who was the linguist also at the beginning of the project. So apart from the need to reconnect with testimonies of traditional knowledge, some very tangible issues were also at stake, and in particular the desire to acquire the means to reinitiate a major ritual known as eputop in Wayana. Often described as a rite of passage or initiation, the eputop is also a ritual for the consolidation of power meant to enhance individual and collective well-being, and at a wider social level, it's also the most important socio-political gathering among the Wayana. This ritual, to put it briefly, is a prerequisite for becoming and continuously being Wayana. The eputop ritual is also key to Wayana historical memory, a kind of archive through ritual performances, and especially its epic songs that had been recorded by former researchers, and very meaningful objects that were kept at the Musée du Quai Branly. Performance of this complex ritual had come to a standstill since about the 90s, end of the 90s, for lack of ritual knowledge and lack of ritual artifacts, which had disappeared along with the last specialists of this tradition. Because of one of its main function was also to enhance stamina and good health, very pragmatic considerations were involved, particularly regarding the drastic social problems Wayana youth are currently confronted with, things such as alcoholism, drug addiction, unemployment, and one of the highest suicide rates in France. The underlying idea was that such a calamitous situation might have been triggered by the receding of the eputop, that ritual, and its restoration a possible solution. So revival of the eputop through the access to the archives was one of the Wayana's major motivation to instigate Sawa. Beyond the ritual, reconnection to cultural knowledge was deemed essential for the young generation who have been cut off from traditional knowledge and its transmission as a result of boarding schools located very far from the villages. And we were also facing human and environmental disaster, or are still actually more and more, such as those consequent to gold mining. Most of the information on Carib cultures that has been collected over the years is accessible, and about the Wayana and Apalai is accessible to anyone familiar with the subtleties of institutional archiving systems. It can be easily found, or rather easily found, by anyone who has a master or a PhD in linguistics and anthropology, and we will receive Mandana classes to know how to find in archives. And it requires a kind of expertise in digital technology, or at least some familiarity with the digital world and websites. However, such is not the case for the Wayana, most of whom have only very limited amounts of formal schooling. And this is where the collaborative project SAWA started, which would include a rather large amount of people and of Wayana and Apalai participants. And so you can see this in this more or less exhaustive list. I'll only read the Wayana, the names of some of the main Wayana and Apalai participants. Aimawa Leopoya and Mataliwa Kuliyaman were the two main leaders. Then Akayuli Palanaima, also called Sixili, and Pekiem Kulitaike were the wise men from the older generation. Mataliwa and Aima were about in their 40s, and Pekiem and Sixili were in the 60s. That's important, they knew more. And Ikale Asaukili and Alapai Malaike were the young generation, but in their 20s. Ikale was a woman, the only woman who really could participate for reasons we could talk about. And Alapai was the informatician, the Wayana guy who knew something about IT. And Yamo Kutaka was the only real Apalai speaker involved, but he was precious and great. Anyway, they were all great. So SAWA was mainly sponsored by the LABEX Les Passés dans le Présent, the past in the present, associated or hosted by the University of Paris-Nanterre, also the Laboratoire d'ethnologie et de sociologie comparative, where I work, and the Musée du Quai Branly, Jacques Chirac. And also we created many other partnerships in Guyana, also with the University of Sao Paulo, the University of Bonn here, Germany, and well, different places. We needed money and help. So the Wayana and Apalai members who initiated the project had no idea of the existence of the digital archives where they could find some of the collections they were looking for, actually most of them. Even when we told them, they wouldn't have been able to access this material on their own, because they also had no idea how to search in the digital platforms. The lexicon, architecture, classification, and modus operandi was foreign to them, not to say totally obscure. And this is unfortunately the case, as we all guess, for most of the platforms that archive data useful to the Wayana's type of search or request. So platforms such as LR, Paradisec, ILA, Pangloss, maybe the Dobbs archive for linguistic documentation, or Telemeta for ethnomusicology are all wonderful for the significance and richness of the material they archive, the access they potentially allow to that material, and their rather user-friendly ergonomics for users used to navigating their academic and museographer mainly. However, the accessibility, as I said, is another story for members of communities foreign to this word. And by accessibility, I mean being able to understand how to see what's in the platform and how to search a document or retrieve information, feeling at a certain ease navigating in the platform, and feeling included in the community of users. Thus, real accessibility also involves a feeling of welcome, cultural familiarity, and respect. A striking feature of the big digital archives that has been previously mentioned this morning is that the language of access are the dominating ones, in particular English. True, most of these platforms now show multilingual pages in the major vehicular languages of the area concerned by the archive. Thus, Paradisec proposes in its toolbar option French, English, Chinese, Bahasa Indonesian, Japanese, Tokpisina, and Bislama. ILA, the Archive of the Indigenous Languages of America, has an interface, a full interface actually in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And Telemeta, a French digital archive with ethnomusicological content, very rich, offers French, English, German, Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. However, except for the new version of ILA, where all the interface is available in the 3 languages, multilingualism often concerns only a small part of the navigation. For example, in Paradisec, if I'm not wrong, it concerns only the page of general presentation of the platform. In Telemeta, translation into the languages announced is very unsystematic, except maybe for English. So the multilingual ambition is clear, but it's also patent that the team did not have, or the teams did not have sufficient resources to complete the project. Sometimes multilingualism of the metadata occurs at the last step of navigation toward the recordings. For instance, in LR, it's not rare to find the titles of the recordings given in a compact bilingual form, English, on the same line, English, and an official language of the country, where the documented language is spoken. For example, English and Spanish for Mocovi of Argentina, and English and French for Notre, a language from Benin. The search system allows for request or search by keywords in Spanish, French, or other dominant vehicular languages, but also remarkably by native words in the languages documented, a few native words. Beside the recording themselves, this is the only locus of the interface that I found, at least, where native or endangered languages are present. It's a great place because, after all, one of the main functions for the users of search archives is the search one, but at the same time, a small one in the general economy and ergonomics of the website. And I'd also like to mention Pangloss, which has this very nice system of synchronization of the audio with transcription and translation. And this is also a page where you find the native language written. All this reveals that those, you, handling and contributing to the big mega digital archive are conscious of the multilingual meta-language problem, face difficulties to try and compensate, I think, and finding only partial solutions. And also it shows that the indigenous languages are in general silenced as meta-languages. So second, the material is often restricted, and understanding how to ask permissions of access and the reasons for the restrictions is not always easy. Third, the classification of the items and their metadata by default follow ontologies that are distinct from, if not controversial with the language and cultural conception of the source communities, indigenous communities, and often counterintuitive for their members. In our experience with the Wayana and Apalai, that was very patent for the ethno-musicological and museographic collections, as we will see later, but the same would arguably apply for linguistic collections. Although these platforms are technically, as you all know, very complex to grasp and very constrained. So this is another word to enter for the people trying to use them. They require speedband, which is not often available, etc. So beyond the problem of accessing the data that might arguably be solved with some training, and despite the unquestionable good intentions of those on the leading board of these platforms, for the members of the source communities, this whole infrastructure often results in a feeling of exclusion and continuing discrimination. Users from the native endangered languages documented must themselves adapt to a language and an ontological system conceived and imposed by the dominating ex-colonial world to access the data collected among their people. Even when the work of documentation is ethic and collaborative, the archiving process and result may go with a feeling of extraction and disposition opposite to the original claim. So, even if big archive platforms such as those mentioned are obviously very important for their role of archiving documentation on endangered languages and as a tool for academic research and linguistic and cultural revitalization, they do not clearly contribute to empower the documented languages as languages of description and reflexivity, as languages adaptable to modern contents, nor as actors and not only objects of the written and the digital world. For some severely endangered languages, this kind of meta-use may simply be irrelevant, if not almost impossible. But for many other fragile languages, it can be a way of strengthening the languages by broadening its uses, and certainly to run counter to the preconceived idea of a division between dominant languages that are the only ones to speak of the modern world, and the indigenous and minority languages that would be confined to registers of the past. So, as you all know, a number of initiatives are attempting to do just that with clear positive symbolic and pragmatic impacts among language speakers. And we can at least mention the tremendous work of translation and adaptation of official and academic text into indigenous languages, or the work made by the Rising Voices to promote and revitalize indigenous languages in digital spaces with a myriad of local-based creative websites and all softwares, or what has been called the localization process of digital structures, such as the creation of information IT terms in a number of Amerindian languages, in particular for the creation of version of Firefox in those languages. For all, For all these reasons, we decided to try and create a digital platform that would provide a unique and simple access under single front pages, both to resources present in existing digital platforms, archives, and to additional data archived on a dedicated space. This platform would attempt to follow the indigenous communities members' own conception and desiderata as for access and organization. The digital platform had to be designed according to the Wayana and Apalai's own standards, their desired organization and modalities, and accessible in their own language. The idea was to create a digital space that would provide a familiar and inclusive environment to the Wayana and Apalai users, give them the feeling of entering a rather intimate space to access something which is their own, be attractive to the young people, while giving rise to positive values and feelings about the native language and culture. This digital space should be conceived by them, or rather, given the initial lack of knowledge concerning websites, their initial lack of knowledge concerning websites and archives, and the technical complexity of that word, with them. And the resulting website was built with a Wayana audience in mind, or at least giving priority to this Wayana audience. So the ergonomics, the architecture, the color code, the choice of fonts, the different categories used for referencing, access right, copyright issues were painstakingly chosen and disappeared in total collaboration according to the standards. Yeah, it's a reset, Wayana reset. Now we enter the Wayana world. So the standards defined by the Amerindian team. The team also spent a long time working on the lexicon used on the platform, as we will see in a moment. This included, of course, the name of the platform. They decided to call it Watao. And this name has a double meaning and significance. It's first the acronym for Wayana, Apalai, Tulawonu, transmitted knowledge, Apetopte, recorded, and Upak, formally. At the same time, in Wayana, the word Watao refers to one of the most appreciated and culturally significant fish that you can see here in the region. So the platform is the access to traditionally transmitted knowledge that has been recorded, while at the same time it's something delicious to be caught, like that fish, by which they mean scrutinized and cleverly seized, and eaten, by which they mean consumed, digested, and integrated. Watao is also one of the animals invoked in the Eputop ritual that I mentioned at the beginning. We see that fish here represented as a mat used in this ritual. And on such mat, during the ritual, stinging ants and wasps are hooked on the map, or they were hooked on the mat. And then the mat was placed on the body of the initiate who has to enduring their the stings. This photo was taken in the Musée du Quai Branly, where the mat was exposed upside down for years, as you can see comparing the two shapes of the fish. And this upside down position provoked hilarity to the Wayana team when they discovered it, when they went to the museum to study the collections. At the same time, it's very emblematic of the museum's collections and other collections' lack of comprehension of the Wayana and valuable object they had in custody. So to our Wayana colleagues, the objects, be they material or immaterial, tangible or intangible, like digital recording, were thoroughly preserved in this museum or these archives, but most often misunderstood. And the project aimed also at correcting misunderstandings, repositioning the items in proper frames, such as in the digital platform's new ordering and classification. and very importantly, recreating connections. This was especially true for objects that were, so that at the end they turn in to the right side. So in the museum, this was especially true for objects that were kept dismembered, such as complex ritual feather headdresses that we will see in a moment, but also chants songs pertaining to a same performance, but kept in different collections, or also artifacts and verbal genres that operated and were meaningful together in lived practices and the memory of them. So giving access and the way of giving access were part of this wide reconnection endeavor. The first stage of the project included several types of tasks and activities, in particular the study of the audio and audiovisual and photographic collection, the study of the objects present in the museum, but also the study of how the internet and digital platform work and what an archive is. This was all the more important to the Wayana team, since according to the traditional regime of knowledge and transmission, one must experience, practice, do in order to know. For the Wayana and Apalai team, the creation of the platform thus implied not only revitalizing traditional knowledge, but also understanding and selectively appropriating new practices and knowledge from the Western world. All these aims involved a tight collaboration between the Wayana Apalai team and various and varied non-Indigenous actors or collaborators. Apart from linguists, anthropologists, and museographers, completion of the project implied hiring digital designers and archivists, computer scientists, graphists, etc. It's all involved curators and restorers, among others. Several years in a row, a group of Wayana intellectuals and Apalai of different genders and generation, as I mentioned, paid regular visits to Europe and attended workshops or work in archives and studied artifacts in various locations, such as the University of Nanterre, the Musée du Quai Branly, le Musée des Cultures Guyanaises in Bonn, Geneva, etc. Elaborating the website Watau in strict collaboration with the Wayana and to a lesser extent Apalai people proved to be a particularly challenging experience, as I will explain a bit more, in what is now known as UXD, user experience design. Or rather, in this instance, as Philippe Eriksson, another collaborator of the project, said, intercultural user experience design, IUXD. So as I said, important issues were the classification of items, access conditions, graphism, and ergonomics, and the language. In existing archives, especially Telemeta, where a large set of the ritual chants and narratives was deposited, the classification is by collector. This criterion was of very little use and very relative interest to the Wayana. We were much more interested on who was chanting and the main function or content of the chants or documented speech. Although this classification presented as the main author, the collector rather than the performer, the white ethnographer rather than the native creator. In the database museums, such as the Musée du Quai Branly, different main criteria can be combined concerning the media, culture, country, fabrication techniques, and a few keywords in the native languages are available, but only a few. Also, these databases, this is a view from the Quai Branly database, present the objects fragmented as they are conserved in the collections. Here you can see many different parts, even very basic elements of the complex mask or lock. And having these fragments in place of the full composite mask was meaningless to the Wayana. And what they did was putting all the pieces together, and that was a very important act of remembering in both senses, putting things together, reconnecting. They also the Olok mask with the chants and the epic songs that are sung during when the people wear the mask. And other ways of reconnections was also to draw and make schemas of how the different parts work together. So on the WATAB website, a new classification was implemented. And interestingly, after lengthy discussions, only a few major classes were proposed. They compose a hybrid classification which combines at first sight, as you can't see here because it's too small and it's in Wayana, use value and media, so alimentation, feasts or rituals, games, artifacts, audio recordings, and photos. The last three categories concern the media of the archive. It might seem very classic, but at the same time, the division reflects the clear Wayana division of expertise between the craftsman competence and the singer or orator's competence. And on the other hand, most of the photos represented living persons or living scenes in the village with persons rather than cultural creations. A variety of keywords were added, but more remarkably, a section called author was created as the highest in the search list, referring to the creator of the artifact when known. So creator and collections took precedence over collectors. Okay, I'm going to go fast here. We can come back to the, and also the translate is very interesting to see what they did with the translation between for the ethno-musical logical collection. In French, it was author with a collector and other author with the performance. But in Wayana, the meaning is a bit different, and actually the emphasis is on the performer, which is called agent, with a morpheme for agent, where the collector is just a person in general, vague, unidentifiable. Previous access conditions. So previous archives respected only copyrights and broadcasting legal rights, and again, lengthy discussions were needed to explain what author in these legal concepts mean and why they were distinguished. But more importantly, in the new platform, cultural restrictions on speech and musical genres and the possibility of seeing some objects were debated at length. And for sake of simplicity, the Wayana at the end only choose two main types of access to the data. Public and non-public, and the latter required the authorization of Wayana administrators of the website. The criteria were too varied to put them all on the page. And for example, for the access to recording of magic formulas, or for some music that only men could traditionally play and hear, you required to have their authorization. Graphism and ergonomics. The visual and the graphic aspect of the website was of paramount importance to the Wayana team. And this is of no surprise given the importance of graphism in Amazonian society and the elaboration and aesthetic of their material productions. So close collaboration, again, took place. Yes, here. Took place between some of the Wayana participants and a graphics designer, Veronica Holguin, who had some knowledge about Amerindian visual cultures and great sensibility to it. Some of the Wayana proposed sketches for the different visuals to appear as web pages or visual elements. And for instance, the logo you see on the upper left was a Wayana ad hoc creation with reference to very traditional graphic motifs. For the other web graphism, the graphics took close inspiration from the drawings and suggestions proposed by the team to create a formal universe. And this team includes experts, some experts in plastic artists, such as Aima Wale. Here, one of the leaders of the project, as you remember, was experts in painting these maluwana, which are wooden discs, very important culturally, suspended at the apex of the Wayana community house. So obviously colors and shapes were also meticulously chosen. For example, discussions took place to decide whether pictures should be displayed in square shapes, in Palasisi style, or in capsules, more apt to signify the importance of roundness in Wayana symbolism. And this might seem a detail, but for them it wasn't a detail at all. Well, producing the website also implied hours translating all the meta language of the interface into Wayana and Apalai. And here you see some examples that I won't comment now, but we can come back to it. And now a large part of the website is available in Wayana, not all for technical reasons and time reasons, and also some part in Apalai. So here are more examples. This was a huge work. Obviously, all these involve ideals and compromises and many frustrations due to constraints of many sorts, technological, archival, legal, and of money. And little by little, it was decided that the platform would give access to at least a cartography of existing collections, cartography of the Wayana and Apalai villages and information about them, access to different types of recording with other implements, interactive links between song and objects that we haven't been able to do yet, complementary information about the item of the archive, enriching the archive was very important to them, a space dedicated to the epitop ritual, and easy integration of new material. And last but not least, because internet access is weak and unreliable in Wayana villages, relying on digital technology was rather risky and somewhat paradoxical, creating a huge and very nice website for communities that don't have access to internet, basically. So it was an investment for the future, with hope infrastructures would soon improve, and actually they are improving, but also to adapt the platform to this problem of internet access in the village. An offline version was created so that people can download the whole website with the content in town, and then go to the villages and use it, and they can update it when they go back to town, etc. So that was very important and actually very useful, for example, for the teacher who used the website as a unique tool to integrate cultural and Wayana content in their teaching. Also, the portability of the website was important, and in particular, the possible version for mobile phones. This was of particular importance to the young generation, which was a main target group for the Wayana leader from the onset. And actually, that was, well, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I don't ignore. I see. I have to finish. It's very clear. So before these are some views of the website where you can go on it, watau.fr. And before passing to the final part, which is my concluding part of the talk, it's worth mentioning that although the portal is digital, in order to be introduced in the villages and to the people, it had to be materially brought to them. So this was also part of a necessary demonstration by the team of the work they had done and why they'd been away for so long periods and at high expenses paid by the project. So the Wayana team and other members of the villages took the digital website on a canoe down the Maroni, and presented the work Villages by Village with an exhibition with workshops also on how to use it, what it contained, films, so that's in schools, for example, showing two different types of families, and films about the project, and workshops to integrate, show how to integrate new material, films, etc. So this is part 4 and not part 3. The Sawa and the Watao experience was positive in many aspects, but it also shed light on real difficulties, intrinsic or unexpected, and fragilities of such an enterprise of creating and maintaining a native digital archive. And let me mention some of them as by way of conclusion. So some issues, and in a way, primary obstacles, are linked to the strong contrasts between the Western and the native conceptions, and here Amazonian conceptions, of cultural transmission, heritage, and knowledge. I won't have time to expand on it here, and these are some publications where I've dealt with it with other colleagues. But the SAWA project, like many indigenous cultural heritageization, patrimonialization initiatives, involved confronting and trying to combine very distinct regimes of historicity and temporality. To put it simply, our voracity to preserve and archive everything connected to the past versus their conceptions where the need to forget is more fundamental to ensuring memory and future life. What happens, for example, when you show a photograph of someone who deceased in spite of cultural norms, implying that everything related to that person must be silenced, including their names. These and other cultural and linguistic differences meant that we had to collaborate and find common paths on the basis of what appeared as incommensurables. For example, the qualification of recordings as isolated items, definable under a closed series of preset metadata inbuilt in Western archives, versus the fundamentally interrelational and contextual conceptions of artifacts or speech performances. Or the Western emphasis on conservation and static display versus the constant transformation, manipulation, and adaptation of things that is privileged in Amazonian societies. Or the Western ideal of unambiguous ontologies and classifications versus the simultaneous networks of meanings and lives of objects and speech that make them relevant to the Wayanas. And we can also mention the different ways of the transmission and acquisition of knowledge are conceived, and the challenge of learning from decontextualized pieces of knowledge. Other difficulties are dependent on the former, but more linked to the digital platforms and collaborative work around them. And here it's a long list. And maybe I have only 0 minutes, so I'm not going to detail all of this, although we could talk a lot for each point. So the challenge for the Wayana to understand the intricacies of what a website and an archive are, the challenge for us to understand their wish, but also the constant translation with most of the Wayana not that is in French and most of the indigenous members of the project incompetent in the Amerindian languages, and also a lot of multilingualism in the project that was very important, enriching, but at the same time made things very complex. The challenge of finding experts on the specific language and culture involved, considering their that they are absolute key as intermediaries, and that one is not enough. And this is, of course, now made much easier since more and more indigenous youth reach higher education and should be essential actors of this project as native mediators. And in the Maya groups I worked with, for example, this would have the obvious leaders of the project. But in the Wayana context, a much more and marginalized group, we try to accompany youth, young people along this path, but they had often other ambitions, and which prevented them to getting fully involved. The challenge of finding compromises between Wayana's expectation, in part mediated by the researchers, and IT and archive engineers, and especially the strong inbuilt constraints of the web archive and publishing software. And I didn't say that, but in our case, Omeka was chosen as the open source web publishing software. The challenge, of course, of the costs, which were really high. I can give you some example, because they included the expenses of very long stays and numerous stays of the Wayana and Apalai team in Paris, always 5 or 6 people, their salaries, plus all the costs of the making of the website, the engineers, or experts, and all the staff were hired by the university and other institutions. And also this means the challenge of convincing our sponsors to spend all this amount, quite a huge amount of money, time, for a website dedicated to just a very small community. So you have to convince very much for that. At the end, they got convinced. But anyway, there is still a lot of work to be done. Probably the most important one is the local management of the archive, because our aim, after having done the whole structure, is okay, we give you that, and now you just can handle with it. But obviously, I mean, not technically, but at least to enrich and to disseminate and to create new material and everything. But that was very hard. The other thing which is hard, I was commenting, is that now in Guyana, the projects have to be done by the autochthonous communities, which is very good. White shouldn't intervene in proposing projects, but of course the Wayana are not very interested in writing projects, as we all understand. So that was another point. So we were kind of excluded nationally, but they wanted to include us again. So it's another problem for the funding. At the end of the journey, what I would say at the middle of the journey, what I would say maybe is that I think the archives, your big archives you're working on, are very important as resources to which this website can, this website can get the material, but we still need to find ways of working together to find more inclusive, culturally sensitive, adaptable, and surprising archive websites. So thank you very much. Sorry for the length, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Valentina, for your experience, for your view, and for this work. I think we are all like with open mouth thinking like, oh my God, this is what we all would love to be able to do, because it's complex and it takes a long time, and it's interesting to see all the different levels of challenges. I'm opening up the floor. Does anyone have just one question, or maybe 50? Anyone, any questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. And well, maybe I missed at the very beginning. I'm sure I missed it. But how many people are in those two communities?
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yes, I think I said it very quickly. It's altogether about 2,500. Yeah, small group. Yeah, but lively. Sorry? They're in different villages.
Are they involved, deeply involved in all this work?
No, I mean, because no, there were about 15 people who were in, I mean, the main, there were about, let's say, 8 people who were really involved continuously through the years. And then there were other people, you know, with different levels of participations. Yeah.
And you spoke about children. Do children speak the language?
Yes. Oh. Yeah, that's something very strong on that and very nice. Actually, it's quite amazing in France that they read the indigenous language is very alive still. And that was, of course, a main point for the creation of the website. Yeah.
Is there a question in the chat?
There are a few comments. A lot of thank you and congratulations for the wonderful presentation. And Hugo from Wikimedia France as a comment question regarding replicability. Such project needs to be replicated to the various languages and a given jurisdiction, for example, France. So,
well, the idea, actually, that's how we got the funding. Also, it was to create a pilot model as something that would be replicable. But as you all understood, also, it's not. I mean, the whole idea can be replicable, and we can say what works and what didn't work. But at the same time, the work has to be done from the start with every community. So it's a long work. It's not something that you could export and say, okay, now in 6 months we're going to do all this work that we've done. No, it takes time because people are to be involved, and they come from very far from us. Yeah.
Maybe a comment on the admirative note. Among the many initiatives that you took, the production of a vocabulary for the technical terms for web browsing, or the tags for XML markup, saying, okay, we have here a sentence and we have a text and we have a word. Well, why not put them into the local language? And it's been done for African languages such as Wolof, and it made a big difference for users that it was not just a Wolof, English, French dictionary that was cool and functional, but they could actually read the XML, which is sort of human readable, with the tags in Wolof, and with the thought that, yes, and it's a beautiful choice in our language, and it's alive. So again, maybe thinking again about the data garden and things blooming, that is something that is very inspiring to see.
So it's true, we work on I didn't, but the Wayana team worked on the translation, on the interface vocabulary, but we could go further because there were already hundreds of terms translated. It was huge work. Yeah. Very nice neologism if you go into the details. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, I was wondering how the community is using, if you know how they are using this material now after some time has passed.
I don't know right now, but I know 2 years ago, because for different reasons, we kind of stopped or put into bracket the project now. But yes, they were using it at schools. Some young people, for example, were using the photos of facial paintings to paint themselves again. Some people are listening to the recordings. So there are different kinds of use. But clearly, we needed to do more workshops in the villages to accompany and disseminate and also the pandemics came at in the middle. And that's why, because the teachers and the schools at different levels were very happy to have the websites and wanted us to, us, not the Wayana team who had collaborated for the website to intervene, but that kind of was, again, put into brackets. So,
Thanks for this very inspiring talk. I had a question about how community members feel about non-community members who may, I would think, want to keep using the old archival systems just because they're used to it. Is that something that's still happening? Do people in the community just want everyone from outside to not use things at all, to go through their system, or to have sort of two parallel pathways into this material?
You mean in the Wayana communities?
Yes.
Yes. Well, actually, they didn't have access at all to all this material before the digital, the work we did. The archives, the old archives, the Western archive, Telemeta existed, but they had no conscience about it and no idea how to use them.
You know, what I mean is how they feel
Yeah.
about people from outside
Ah,
the
okay,
community
okay, got it. That's right.
continuing to
Yeah.
access those older archives.
It was not a very strong point to them, especially I think because they think we don't understand what is in there. So I mean, we can't just see it, and it's not of big use. So there was no much of this kind of, we want that only for us. And actually, I was expecting more restrictions on the website. And at the end, they were quite loose. I mean, there were some things they really don't want. And we're not in Australia, so it's a bit different. So they had these open, and also the fact that it's like them. I mean, they can see a website, they see the website, then they don't understand it. They're used to not understand it. And they think it's the same for us, like that mat upside down. We see the mat. This mat has been exposed, exhibited like this for years and years. Nobody just noticed until they came. So it's a question of what you see and what you really see. Yeah. Or what you hear and what you understand. Yeah.
This is. We have two more, so this here, and then we there, and then we're going to go into the coffee break. So please grab Valentina and spend time with her and ask her in detail about this work. So.
Hello, Hugo from Wikipedia. Also send a few questions, and I am also live tweeting. So if you see me on my cell phone, it's because I try to connect the two communities. So my question is for the sustainability of the infrastructures, because over the decade I saw some great projects which were online, and after some years you find out the website is not online anymore because the funding stopped. And it's institutional, so when the workers stop to work, it stops. So I wonder if you have some plan B, or if the whole website is open source or open license, so at least there is sustainability of the infrastructure, which can be seen in multi-decade terms.
Yeah, well, now I must say that's one of our big problems. So now we're not seeing into decades, but we just got 3 years funding from the CNRS for, I know it's just for maintenance, and so, but that's a big problem. I know it's so it's part of the. So we have to, because there is a lot of money to create projects, but very little money to just maintain them. Yes, I guess, yeah.
Valentina, we have here another question. Deborah from the online chat, she's asking if there are other similar projects that you know of.
Not really, not really. But again, I think there must be. But this one was kind of important because of the major institution, right? And also the time we could spend creating that. Yeah. That's very nice sign language.
Just one last question from my colleague who presented earlier in the other room. He's looking at his dissertation and doing this cultural design work and for language archives. And I'm interested to take something back for him so that he can connect. He's not aware of any literature, and I'm like snapping photos to send to him. Like, this is you need to plug in with these people. And so, if there's other people in the room here that have this cultural design connection, please see me so I can hand it off to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Thank you.
Thank you to you.